Delighted to see that we have a full house here today, and welcome to everybody who's also online. A digital powerhouse 2030. How do we get there? Well, imagine if you had a prime minister who from 19 to 21 was actually responsible, the responsible minister also for digital. Imagine if you had a prime minister who was holding the president, which was, of course, the prime minister of the country that holds the presidency of EU, and not only any presidency, but one of the most important presidencies, the final one that can really kind of make a difference on the big European agendas before the next term. And imagine if that prime minister also had a background as a business leader. Well, can you be that lucky? Nah. Yes, you actually can. I mean, with us today, we have a gentleman that have all those elements, and who better to tell us, how we will become a digital powerhouse? Just coming back from the Munich Security Conference, the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo. Please welcome on stage.
Everyone, that was a very nice introduction, and I have to say I love to come back to what I've been doing before. I was Minister of Digital Agenda in Belgium from 2014 to 2021 almost, so a really long period during which the digital agenda policy was really being put together. The issue is that I've left this domain now for 4 years. So many things have happened in the meantime. So it was good for me also to a bit catch up to what has happened in this fascinating domain. What I would want to do is maybe talk a bit general about the big challenges we have as a European Union, because they're not that different to this domain, and then I'll go more in detail on digital agenda. You might have seen that in the past weeks we've in Europe discussed a lot about agriculture. We had some big agriculture manifestations happening over the last weeks throughout Europe, also in Brussels. Brussels is the capital of many things, also the capital of manifestations. We should almost build a park just to make sure that manifestations can take place and that they're not blocking the rest of the city. We had yesterday a summit on heavy industry here in Europe, and as you say, indeed, coming back from the Munich Security Conference. The world today is not exactly the world that we Europeans have dreamed of. We Europeans, we believe in free trade, in the respect of democracy, and in equality, and so on. The world has become way more geopolitical and way more hostile to our view of how the world should be organized. Now, we can complain about this for a long time, or we can adapt. And that's what we're doing. We are adapting. We are making our economy stronger, more geopolitical. We still are open to the rest of the world, but we do it a bit in a less naive way. And we're integrating different fields which maybe in the past were not integrated well enough. Industrial policy, defense policy, trade, climate policy, all of that basically is linked one with the other. And rightfully so, because we are in a world of great powers, and in great powers, every lever is being used to put us under pressure. Now that's the general frame in which we are. The complaints that we hear are actually complaints which are quite general. Our single market is the biggest asset that we have. Jacques Delors did an incredible job 39 years ago, but it definitely needs an upgrade because in some domain, we're actually not a single market at all. We as a European Union, we tend to regulate, and maybe on average, we regulate quite well. But maybe we have a tendency to do a bit too much of what we do well, and we have a tendency to regulate a lot. And we are a continent of of regulation, or sticks, as you would call it. We're not a continent of carrots, and maybe we need to add a few more carrots to the mix. All these things are things I hear, and in the industrial sector, and in agriculture, and I hear them also in this domain. That is what will be needed in the next tenure. And indeed, as you said, our presidency is a bit of a special one because it started on January 1st. Our capability to do legislative work will stop in April, more or less, because then parliaments will start to shut down. And our room for new policy is quite limited because the European Commission and other European institutions are stopping. But it gives us a great opportunity to set the agenda for the next tenure, for the next 5 years. Very high on that agenda will be competitiveness, and competitiveness in the broad sense. And if we talk about competitiveness these days, well, competitiveness in the digital world definitely is something which is at the core of what we do. Yesterday, at this summit of heavy industry, Ilham Kadri, who is the CEO of Syensqo, one of the most interesting Belgian companies, chemical companies, said the chemical industry is the mother of all industries, because all industries use chemistry. Well, then if we talk about digital, or we talk about AI, you could say is the central nervous system of all industries, because over the last years, any company visit, any trade federation I have talked with, always will talk about digital and will talk about the power of AI. Now let me go a bit more in detail on what I think should be the key elements that we put forward in the next 5 years of policy and related to digital. And I'm linking it a bit to historical analysis that has been done. You know, when in the 10th and the 12th century, our societies were taking shape with cities being strong and being at the center of economics and of trade. There was an analysis done by a Belgian historian called Henri Pirenne, who looked at what are the different factors that made when certain cities or certain countries became strong and others became less strong. And if you look at those 6 factors, you can actually quite easily relate it to the digital world as well, and see how do we score on those factors, and how do we make sure that here in Europe we become strong entities in a digital world. First of all, first element he looked into was geographical location and access to trade routes. Well, today, geographical location in itself, of course, is less important. What is important is to be a hub and to have connectivity. This is exactly what has been done with the infrastructure target in the European Digital Decade Policy Program. Gigabit networks, access to 5G or equivalent by 2030, and so on. There, gigantic progress has been done. I think here in Belgium, I have to admit that we have fallen a bit behind, but that's because we were leading 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were one of the leading countries in connectivity because we had such a vast coax network. That means that we invested a bit less in fiber because it was less necessary. We see that we are catching up these days. I think on the goal of achieving 10,000 highly secure edge nodes and quantum computer, I think throughout Europe we see there a domain where we have a major challenge and where we have to invest way more. But connectivity, we see that throughout the world you have examples that do it faster than here in Europe. So I think connectivity, especially from a policy perspective and a government perspective, should be the number one priority in what we should invest, because it's kind of the framework infrastructure that you need. Second element being put forward was the economic activities. Economic activities which are broad, looking at big data, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and so on. In Europe, most of that is being fueled through SMEs. And that's very typical for the way our economy is organized in Europe and also in the digital part of Europe. There we have a major issue because the single market, as I said, is the biggest asset that we have. But that single market, with the freedoms of movement of people, of services, and so on that we have, has not fully adapted. Today, we do not have a single market of data. And we've been talking for a long time about it. Being sure that data localization requirements are being wiped away is one of the priorities that we should have. Other element of single market which we definitely are lacking is the capital market. And the capital market union is something we have talked about since 2008 already. And that was after the financial crisis, and we have not been able to take the necessary steps forward. Today, we are in a situation where if we need scale-up capital, that scale-up capital very often is provided not by European finance, very often it's provided by Anglo-Saxon finance. Now that Anglo-Saxon finance very often is drawing its capital from European pension funds. So what we are seeing is that because there's no lack of capital on the European continent, so approximately 2% of our GDP is flowing out in capital to the United States, is going to US private equity funds and venture capital funds that then use our own capital to invest in European startups and European scale-ups. I think everyone can understand that we're losing out on that dimension, and creating a European capital markets union is not the most sexy topic, but it is crucial to finally have the right type of financing for any type of economic activity, but definitely in the economic world. Third element is protection and security. That was important in the Middle Ages. It's important these days as well. I think by during the time of this speech, which now is approximately 10 minutes, one could count how many cyber attacks already have taken place and the damage that cyber attacks are incurring during just such a short time frame. Just to mention you, cybersecurity is a domain in which Belgium really is leading. For years now, Belgium has been the best protected country in terms of cybersecurity, and it's demonstrated by a top position that we have had now for years in the National Cybersecurity Index. We've also been leading in, for example, creating a framework for ethical hacking for whistleblowers and so on. But in this domain, it is one where, as Europeans, we need to work much more closely together. Much more closely together in the purchasing of our cybersecurity systems, but also much more closely just in crisis response. In crisis response, we still have a tendency to just look on our own, whereas sharing information as fast as possible between each other is crucial in that. Cybersecurity is part of our defense policy today. I think all of you know that when we are being threatened, for example, by Russia, it is in many ways, but also in the cyber way. Fourth element is governance. And yes, we have a tendency in Europe to regulate a lot. And I know that, for example, on GDPR, there was a lot of, let me call it, shouting on how to implement it. Now, the question with our regulation, for example, GDPR, is not so much if the European regulation was wrong. The whole discussion is on how it is being implemented. And there, it is way too diverse. And this is, when we talk about creating a real single market, one of the elements is how do we better integrate our regulators and how do we better harmonize the implementation? Because GDPR had the goal to be a common regulation throughout Europe. But all of you have different ways of adapting to it depending on the country in which you are working. So there we're missing part of the benefit that we should have. Same with the AI Act. What I found interesting is that in most of the discussions that I've had over the past months, is that a lot of the industry sees value in regulating AI one way or the other, but also warns me in saying, well, let's make sure that innovation can still happen. I would think that the right approach should be that in the development side, in the innovative side, we try to be as open as possible. But then in the application, so when you bring it to the market and you bring it to certain domains that affect our daily lives, there you want transparency and you need to be strict on how it is being done, what the input is, and so on. So it's a bit the model that you use in the pharmaceutical world. You're open on the innovation side, but in the bringing to market, of course, you're very strict to be sure that it is safe and that it respects our rules. Fifth element, it should be on our agenda, it's not a surprise, is a skilled, diverse, and dynamic workforce. We know that this is a major challenge. It's been a major challenge for years, but it's actually feasible to tackle it in quite a short time frame. And there are examples throughout Europe, for example, Spain, that has focused most of its investment post-COVID on establishing digital skills. It should be an example for all of us in Europe in using education systems which are more diverse than the one we use today. If you are based here in Brussels, some of you might maybe know the initiative called Be Central, which is in our central station in Brussels. I think it's a prime example of how you create a space for new education systems. It is one of the projects that I launched when I was Minister of Digital, with very little investment, very little public investment, but an open space for private actors, non-governmental actors to work in education. So the education world needs to open up much more to other methods, other ways of financing education and involving the private sector way more. Last element that I would like to mention is how do we incentivize and how do we push entrepreneurship and research in innovation. And there, as a public authority, we have a very important role to play. And just taking one example on where I think as a European Union, we've done it quite well. And that is in the EU Chips Act. The EU Chips Act that actually we did faster than the US Chips Act, and that really played on the right dimensions. What did we do well in the EU Chips Act is to see throughout Europe where are the real centers of competence. And the real centers of competence which have been identified is in Germany, Fraunhofer, in France, Leti, and in Belgium, IMEC. So it was really distributing the capital on value added on competence and not the classic European way of giving everyone just a little bit. That was looking on where the research investment would happen, and then using a method where you open it up as much as possible. For example, what are we doing now in chips design? And chips design is what IMEC is especially good at, is how do we pull other industries into chips design? Instead of buying semiconductors just off the shelf, semiconductors today will play an incredibly important role in AI and implementing AI in all types of industries, is pulling in those industries to IMEC, for example, the food processing industry, and telling them, okay, we are going to design a specific semiconductor for your needs. That to me is the example of how you need to organize it. You do fundamental research, which is heavily state-sponsored, but you create more access to your industries that today have the feeling that they are quite far from this domain and pull them into that fundamental research. That's how you do innovation, is opening up your academic excellence to industries that today actually feel that they are quite far away from it. So let me conclude by giving you maybe a general assessment. I think that in the digital world, yes, there are domains where we have major challenges. There are domains in which we need to cooperate better. But what potential we have? And I have a tendency to feel throughout Europe a level of doubt on whether we can lead, whether we can play a role in a world that is maybe a bit more hostile towards our way of how we look things should be organized. Yes, we can definitely play a very important role in that, but then we have to play on our strengths. Our strength is our talent, the diversity which we have on our continent, the possibility to work together and to stand shoulder by shoulder. The fact that to us there is the right balance between economic development and the values that we stand for. And that is why I believe that the best is yet to come. And that's a small advertisement I do. It's a book I wrote 2 weeks ago. In Dutch, it says, waarom het beste nog moet komen. And I've actually translated it in English, which is not the national language in Belgium. But I know that there is a very large international community in Belgium. And I think we Belgians have an interesting story to tell. So I hope you have a great conference here. I hope you have stimulating discussions. And let's show what we are capable of as Europeans. We have a lot of potential. It will not come by itself, but I'm confident that we can do it. Thank you.
So I'm not going to let you go yet, right? And I was imagine if you have a prime minister that's also an author, or you just wrote a book.
Okay, so
We need to know
I wrote a book, but I'm very transparent on it. Someone wrote the book with me. And so very often politicians will say, I wrote a book, and then I have a host writer, and the host writer is never being discussed. In the book, you will see on the last page the name of the host writer. Because indeed, the question is, what do you put your time in? So the book came out of video discussions which we had, telephone discussions we had, and a few walks. And the walks were in the Flemish Ardennes, which is a region where I grew up. Don't stick around in Brussels. Go visit the rest of the country as well.
Wonderful. I also wrote a book.
And you wrote it yourself.
Now that you mention, the ghostwriters, right? I have many ghostwriters, but we just published something called The Single Market, a Love Story today, yeah? And that love story is how, businesses fall in love with the common market, the single market again. You mentioned that. You said this is our most important asset. You mentioned competitiveness. You even said digital and data is the central nervous system of the society. So now after this presidency, what would be like the legacy, 1, 2 things that you would like to leave behind on digital and competitiveness?
Yeah, so let me link it to the digital market work. And there we've asked Enrico Letta, who's a previous prime minister of Italy, to work specifically on how do you make a 2.0 version of the single market. And a big part of the work that he is doing is related to digital. One is free flow of data. You know that the market has its free flow of people, of goods, of services, of capital in principle, but for the moment not enough. The free flow of data is not there today. And it's a major impediment for our SMEs who, if they want to be present in 27 countries, very often are confronted with all types of data localization laws. Second element is what I mentioned in my speech, is the regulators. Better integrating our regulators. I mean, this is an industry where regulators play an important role, telecom regulators, competition regulators, and so on. And they have a tendency to be very national in their operating. There again, we make it extremely hard for our digital companies to be active. And so what we see today is we Europeans, we are a continent of innovation. So the innovation we do. The scaling up of that innovation is mostly done with US capital, but that US capital is actually very often European capital. But you see that they're skimming away a big part of the value added, of the profits. And then the market introduction is very often not first in Europe because it's complicated with our 27 different systems. You see what you're losing. I mean, the fundamental innovation is doing here, but then the skimming away of the profit very often happens, but it happens with our money. And then the benefit to our public often we come in third row. It's first in the US, then China, Japan, and then it comes to us. That's the tangible thing that we want to leave. And you know, I'm saying this not at all as a criticism of what the European Commission is doing. I think over the past 5 years, the European Commission has been doing a marvelous job. But we need to put the bar higher, and we need, in this world, we need to step on the top of our toes. But that's when we are at our best.
So you spoke about the central nervous system, but you also said we need more carrots. Mm-hmm. Can we, I mean, all the incentives, you know, in the internal market, you can have the regulation coming out of the Commission, you know, it ends up in 27 different versions, but the incentives are held by the member states. Yeah. Are there common incentive structures that can boost this, like digital investments? Is that something that we should be discussing in the Council?
I would love to have it, but that domain, the taxation and fiscal domain, is pure national for the moment, and so we will not have our own Inflation Reduction Act because we don't have that tool on the European level. What we do have is common investments schemes for research. And so when I gave the example on what we did with the EU Chips Act, I think it's an example of how we can work together in the fundamental research, and then opening it up as much as possible to our SMEs and so on. That we have. Maybe in the future we will have more taxation capability, but for the moment we don't have it. Then maybe another domain is working together, and I think you mentioned in your love story, if I can call it that way, is as European countries in so many domains related to digital. We can integrate much more, and there I would not impose it on the 27. Let's do it a bit in an organic way. Certain countries have a habit of working together. The Benelux countries have a habit of working together very often with the Scandinavian countries. It works well together as well. Just push us in doing it, and then maybe that will lead to do it as a 27, but let's not lose our time in years of discussions to try to force it on the 27, knowing that the speed of integration is a very different one. Mm.
So I need to get you off stage in 2 minutes, and I need to do 2 things before. I need to, one question from the audience, and I need to take a picture with my other booklet.
Okay.
So let me take this one. It says, there is a dramatic growth and diversity in the cyber policies at country, regional, and global level. Are we doing enough to harmonize and collaborate?
Good question. Question asked by Anonymous. That's not by accident. We know where you are. No. Yes, I agree. I think we have best practices a bit everywhere, and we should integrate that much more in a light system. And that's a bit what we have done in Belgium with our Center for Cybersecurity. It's actually not, in the statistics, people would say, well, you're not investing that much money in it. But it's very efficient because it's a coordinating role. And it's basically coordinating all the cybersecurity efforts that our private sector is doing. I mean, we have a lot of players in the private sector who have well-developed cybersecurity systems because they have critical infrastructure, for example. And what they do is they coordinate in a very systematic way all the things that pop up, all the issues that are there, then try to synthesize it and then disseminate it, kind of spread it to the rest of our economy. It's a very, very efficient system. We should do that as Europeans as well. Is when we see that something happens, is better do this effort of synthesizing it, understanding what the root cause is, and then share it as much as possible. So yes, I agree. We can do much more, and it's not very expensive to do, and the payoff is a gigantic one.
And just highlighting that Agoria, our Belgium member, is a part of what we are launching right now in Digital Europe, the cyber hubs. We're going to build 10 cyber hubs in Europe. And of course, Belgium is one of the critical countries for us.
Of course we are.
Yeah.
we are. So you might know we're the country of chocolate, beers, and diamonds, but we are a country of innovation. And the chocolates and beers, they are great, but our real core is an innovation country. And in any of the innovation indexes through Europe, we're always top 5. Together with the Scandinavian countries, by the way. And we are a country of innovation, but we're also a country of convening. That's why we are good at conferences like this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. It's been an excellent speech. Okay. And more carrots, less sticks, more collaboration, much more connectivity, better collaboration on cyber, and more innovative collaboration between private and public sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.